Good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon committee meetings for September 12, 2016. Our first committee meeting is Lake Whatcom Reservoir and Natural Resources, and Dan Hamill is the chair.
Thank you, Pinky. I'm joined today by council members Gene Knudsen and Terry Borneman. We have 3 items before us. The first one is Washington Conservation Corps end-of-year presentation. I'm just going to read this summary statement here. Bellingham citizens have benefited during the last 13 years from the city's relationship with the Washington Conservation Corps. The Public Works Department currently sponsors 2 crews through a joint fund agreement with the Washington State Department of Ecology and the Federal AmeriCorps program. The crews have been crucial to the success of the city's habitat restoration efforts. This presentation given by the WCC crew members will showcase program benefits, including the crew's contributions to the local community, their environmental restoration efforts, and the financial benefits of the program.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. I'm going to turn it right over to Annalise, and she can introduce the topic.
Hi, good afternoon. Annalise Burns, Habitat and Restoration Manager, City of Bellingham Public Works. I have the pleasure of helping oversee our 2 Washington State Conservation Corps crews. And as Dan just mentioned, the city has had 13 years consecutive sponsorship of our WCC crews. And we are only one of 3 jurisdictions in the state with that opportunity. So it's incredibly special that we have both crews. And these are amazing young adults who really are the backbone of the on-the-ground work that we do to restore salmon and improve our water quality and understand better the resources that we have in the city. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce the WCC crew. And Mike Parlskin is one of the Washington Conservation Corps crew supervisors.
Well, thank you very much for having us. We didn't get to come in here and do this every day. As Annalise said, I'm Mike Perelskin. I'm a Washington Conservation Corps crew supervisor here with the City of Bellingham. And yeah, we are part of the Public Works Department in the Natural Resources Office. And I am a Department of Ecology employee. I supervise 5 Corps members, and so I supervise one of the Corps crews. And I have a master's in education, and I've been living in Bellingham for 13 years.
Hello, I'm Victoria Clausen. I'll be returning onto the City of Bellingham crew next year as an assistant supervisor, and I hope to use this program to further my education in environmental studies.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hernick, and I have a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Education from Western, and I have just been accepted into the Peace Corps, so I'll be teaching environmental education in Panama after this term.
My name is Julie Lewis. I also went to Western Washington University and graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Science with a freshwater ecology emphasis, and I hope to further my career in improving water quality.
Hello, I'm Joshua Osink, and I also graduated at Western Washington University with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology, emphasizing in ecology, evolution, and organismal biology, and a minor in environmental science. And next year, I will continue as a crew supervisor with the NC crew located in Bellingham.
Hi there, my name is Maki Matsumoto Herval. I am a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a BA in Environmental Studies and a BA in Geography with an emphasis in people and wildlife landscapes.
All right, and Lyle Scar, that guy in the bottom right there, he is in Louisiana with part of my crew and part of his crew responding to the flood down there. So that's where the rest of us are today. The Washington Conservation Corps has origins with the Civilian Conservation Corps program, but the Washington Conservation Corps itself started in 1986. It is currently part of the Department of Ecology in the Shorelands and Environmental Assistance Division and partnered with AmeriCorps. Our Corps members sign up for 1 year. They are paid an hourly wage, and then they receive a $5,800 education award at the end of their term. And they're able to use that towards paying off student loans or continuing education. Our crews here with the City of Bellingham were sort of conceived out of the Olympic pipeline explosion that happened in 1999. A couple years later, with the settlement funds, the 2 WCC crews were funded. When that explosion occurred, there were 230,000 gallons of gasoline that spilled into Whatcom Creek. About 100,000 fish perished, and another 3,000 birds and small mammals as well. But by 2007, the WCC crews had restored about 47% of the canopy cover. So we're going to go ahead and continue telling you all a bit about what it is we do here, what kind of projects, and how they fit into your legacies and strategic commitments. Across the city of Bellingham and within the UGA, as well as out into the Lake Whatcom watershed, we manage over 70 sites, and we maintain 400,000 plants, control noxious weeds, and remove trash from all of those sites. And every year, annually, we add new sites, particularly this year out in the Lake Whatcom watershed.
City of Bellingham buys watershed properties out by Lake Whatcom to protect them from development. This is helping promote clean, safe drinking water. By doing restoration, this slows, filters, and cools runoff before it gets to the lake. This is our largest site, Yui, which is 37 acres. Another important site that we have been working out on is Zobris, that we work to restore and maintain. This has Anderson Creek that flows through it, which is a significant tributary to Lake Whatcom, which is where the City of Bellingham gets its drinking water. One of our more new restoration site is the North Galbraith Mountain Preserve. At this site, it was previously logged and allowed to grow back very thickly with alders and maples. The City of Bellingham has bought this property, and we have been working to thin this forest to open the canopy cover to allow conifers to grow back, so a mixed forest would be promoted. This helps with water quality by taking up more nutrients. This is especially important since Lake Whatcom has had water quality issues in the past due to excess nutrients causing algae growth, which clogs filters for drinking water. This will be especially important for restoration as we go into the future with increasing development and increasing people in the City of Bellingham.
Washington Conservation Corps contributes to the healthy environment of the City of Bellingham by adding many of the native plants around the city. This year we installed 25,000 native plants. One of the major projects we got to be a part of this year was working on the Padden Creek daylighting project. It was previously blocked by a tunnel that had prevented fish passage since the 1890s and created potential flood risks for over 150 homes. The creek was opened up last fall, and we installed 15,000 plants along the creek. We continue to monitor the site with ongoing spawner surveys and vegetation monitoring. We also worked on the Whatcom Creek reroute, which won the American Public Works Association Project of the Year award. During the construction of I-5, 2 bodies of water were created, Bug Lake and Sunset Pond, which have intersected Whatcom Creek and blocked salmon habitat because of their increased solar heat and invasive species. Whatcom Creek previously supplied 32 miles of habitat before the construction of I-5. During the summer of 2015, the first phases of the Whatcom reroute began by diverting the creek almost a mile around the pond. to reactivate the original channels and eliminate fish passage barriers. This opened up 22 miles of salmon habitat. We also defished the areas before Phase 1 of the reroute was completed and planted native vegetation, including wetland emergence and willows. We are currently in the beginning stages of Phase 3, monitoring erosion levels for public safety and future habitat studies.
So we continue to help the city maintain a healthy environment by participating in a lot of monitoring projects throughout the year. And this year we spent a lot of time at Cemetery Creek, which happens to be a major tributary to Whatcom Creek, which, as Mike had said earlier, was that creek that was involved in the Olympic pipeline explosion in '99. So one of those monitoring projects that we did was a smolt trap. We did this in early spring, like March through June. It took us about a week to construct, and we would go out twice a day for 90 days to check this trap, and we were checking for any species that we found in the creek. So we found a lot of natives, such as like stickleback, and we found about 1,300 coho, which is a good sign. And we also found, some invasives like the bullfrog, and so this is just one of our monitoring projects that we do.
We assist with vegetation surveys at Cemetery Creek to monitor changes and the health of the ecosystem. We meticulously identify and record targeted species on established terrestrial and aquatic transects on the site. Other health and diversity indicators for Cemetery Creek include avian and amphibian surveys, where in March through June, we identify individuals by sight or sound and record them by species.
Another monitoring project we participated in was checking the water quality of Cemetery Creek as well as the ponds associated with that water body. And so in the wintertime, we would go out once a month, and in the summertime, we'd go out twice a month. We would check dissolved oxygen, conductivity, temperature, pH, and we'd collect fecal coliform samples from the water. And this is just another metric that we use to assess the restoration sites and create a baseline for what we want to progress towards.
As you know, there are 3 streams in our city that are listed by the state as impaired water bodies, and we have a TMDL for temperature on Squawcum Creek and Padden Creek and Whatcom Creek. One thing we do is we monitor temperature and shade in the Squawcum reroute by placing small little temperature loggers that record temperature every 30 minutes continuously. And we also go through the creek bed and monitor the canopy cover through the creek.
All right. On top of restoration and monitoring, we also do a number of other projects around town. We maintain a Model Toxics Control Act site, the Eldridge Municipal Landfill at Little Squawcum Park. We built an exclusion fence around it, that split rail fence shown there on the bottom left, and put up signage. We also constructed a potting shed recently at our shop down in Fairhaven, where we have a number of native plants that we grow up for volunteer and outreach events in particular. And then we also work to close off some of these social trails around the city, just to prevent erosion and impact in our critical areas. We also have participated in nearshore salmon studies in partnership with the Skagit River Systems Cooperative at 10 different sites around Bellingham Bay. We participated in beach seining. So we go through and identify all the species that we catch there, and in particular we're looking at a ESA listed Chinook, and that project has come to a conclusion, and the report should be out for that in upcoming weeks.
We also have spent some time at Padden Fishways monitoring the water level. We've gone out throughout the year, twice a week to monitor what the water level is at to determine if it is a potential fish passage obstacle. We also applied for a hydraulic project approval permit this year to help better the passage for the salmon. Now that project will be occurring actually this week. Another thing we do for the fishways is we'll clear out the debris to help better flow and also help better salmon passage.
For several years, the WCC has conducted spawner surveys on Padden Creek, Cemetery Creek, and Whatcom Creek, which includes the human-altered restoration sections for each creek. The survey predominantly focuses on collecting spawner data for salmon, but also includes opportunities to have face-to-face interaction with the public and encourage local stewardship to protect our local creek resources.
So we also recognize how, we recognize and appreciate how important sense of place is within our community. And one way that we help create this feeling is through participating in volunteer events. So this past October, we partnered with Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association as well as the Bellingham Parks and Recreation Department and hosted Make a Difference Day. We had over 250 volunteers come out, and we planted about 1,500 plants all along the Whatcom Reroute restoration site.
The WCC's commitment to service includes a day of service on Martin Luther King Day where members contribute and support community vibrancy. This year, in partnership with House to Home, we delivered furniture, and then later that day collected 350 pounds of baby food and delivered that to the Bellingham Food Bank.
So most of the year when we do planting, we are planting natives in restoration sites to improve water quality and habitat. However, we also realize that it's important for our community members to have beautiful, healthy green spaces that they can go and enjoy. And so we set aside some of our planting time this year to plant along trails within the city and places that community members can access and enjoy and reap the benefits of nature. So.
In partnership with the Parks Department, we go through these green spaces and we maintain these green spaces by removing invasive species along with maintaining the trail edges and decommissioning social trails that might lead off of these trails.
One way we participate in helping Bellingham become a more safe and prepared community is through disaster response. In the last year, we've responded to a number of local fires, one in the Lake Whatcom watershed on Stewart Mountain last summer, as well as recently on Sumas Mountain and actually in Birch Bay as well. WCC crew members were first responders to the Padden Creek sewage leak. And as I mentioned before, we have 6 folks out on the Louisiana flood response currently. Oh, and for the last decade or so, Washington Conservation Corps crews have also participated in cleanup of illegal camping, as well as site assessment and their threat to water quality.
In many ways, the WCC represents the city, and we become a face for the city for a lot of community members, especially our neighbors next to our restoration sites, and we keep open communication with them and tell them what we're doing, as well as we have these outreach and community days where we allow the community to come out and see what we do, and we show them. Like here, we have a sample smolt trap for the kids to see how we ran the smolt trap this year. And that's our presentation, and thank you, Council, for allowing us to show you what we do.
Thank you. Committee members, questions, comments? Terry?
Yeah, not a question, just a comment. You know, I really look forward to every year of the Corps coming in and giving this report. It's amazing the diversity and the quality of projects that are being done by your organization. And a lot of times community members have no idea all the work that you're doing and how lucky the city is to have you working on projects that are so important to the city. So I want to thank all of you. I mean, you do incredible work here, and we do really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
I just wanted to just say that I think you're hitting all the right notes in terms of leveraging our community's volunteer resources and engaging those volunteers and working with House to Home, the virtual furniture bank that's here in Bellingham and Whatcom County, providing furniture for those families. I know that's a service component of the work that you do. You're also creating capacity in our community's resiliency, which is a big thing for our community. And I agree with Councilmember Borneman. I think that you're unsung heroes, in my opinion, and I really want to thank you for the work that you do. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Vargas.
If I could just ask a quick question. I agree with all of those things. Yes, unsung heroes. You do your water quality measuring. I'm kind of curious where the locations are that you do the water quality measuring.
So this year we did all the water quality monitoring on Cemetery Creek, and there are ponds located within that creek system that we also collect water quality, like fecal coliform samples, as well as depth measurements and the temperature, solid oxygen. But everything this year was Cemetery Creek. I think we did one day on Sunset Pond. Is that correct? Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Josh, do you want to talk about where you have temperature loggers as well?
Oh, yeah. We also have temperature loggers that are located along the reroute, and then we have 3 further temperature loggers in the Cemetery Creek ponds at their outlets. And we're just monitoring to see how the temperatures are changing, and this year we had Squawcum Creek go dry, which probably adds a lot more data than we anticipated, I guess. But
All right, other questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item is regarding the Homeowner Incentive Program update. The Homeowner Incentive Program is a joint effort between the City of Bellingham and Whatcom County as partners in the Lake Whatcom Cooperative Management Plan. The Home Improvement Program provides technical and financial assistance to Lake Whatcom watershed residents to encourage and motivate homeowners to make voluntary changes to their property for the purposes of improving water quality and fostering stewardship. Staff will provide an update on the HIP program as it transitions in 2017 from a small-scale pilot program to a robust integrated city and county program serving additional areas of the Lake Whatcom watershed. Ted Carlson.
Thank you. As Councilmember Hamill pointed out, the Homeowner Incentive Program is a joint program between the city and the county, working through the Lake Whatcom Management Program. City staff, along with county staff, have been working on the program, making recommendations to improve the program moving forward. I'll turn it over to Renee, and she'll run through what they've been working on.
Good afternoon, Renee LaCroix, Public Works. As Ted mentioned, we're going to talk about the Homeowner Incentive Program and provide an update for Council. The presentation has 3 main parts. We're going to talk about our overall phosphorus reduction strategy for Lake Whatcom and how the HIP program is a part of that. We're going to do a quick review of HIP 1.0 and then talk about what HIP 2.0 looks like in the future. So when we talk about Lake Whatcom phosphorus reduction, it's a very complex problem, and the solution lies in many different variables and many different aspects. So we have a very robust land acquisition program, as you know, where we buy property to remove the development from the watershed. We have special development regulations for the Lake Whatcom watershed, specifically removed to limit the amount of phosphorus that comes off development. We have a robust outreach and education program to help the community understand what the issues are and what they can do to be a part of the solution. We also have a robust capital program where we're actually out retrofitting existing areas, existing development areas And in those situations, we construct facilities that treat runoff from public and private property. The facilities themselves are located on public property and they're publicly funded. And the last tool that we're going to talk about is the HIP program, where we're retrofitting private property to reduce the phosphorus load going into the lake. And that involves developing financial and technical assistance. And it's a situation where the government invests staff time and funding, the private property owner invests personal time and shares in cost, and the private sector provides the expertise and the skilled labor to make it happen. So when we talk about HIP, this is what HIP projects tend to look like, just to give you a visual. So things like native landscaping, rain gardens where the rain will filter into the garden and infiltrate into the ground before going into the lake rather than running over the surface. Dry wells with permeable paving. So underneath this, there's a facility that actually retains the water and allows it to percolate out through the ground before it runs into the lake. And then same with underground pollution filters. So that's what they tend to look like. They can be very beautiful. They can be integrated into existing houses to be an amenity. For HIP 1.0, from 2011 through 2015, we did 283 site visits, and out of that came 180 actual completed projects. And within those 180 completed projects, there were 422 BMPs installed. So BMP is an acronym for Best Management Practices. So it's the photo that I just showed you with all the different things. And the cumulative effect of those projects is that we removed 24 pounds of phosphorus from the lake per year through those HIP projects. And that also equates to 8 million gallons of flow reduction per year. So this slide shows you that HIP 1.0, which was funded through a grant, was fairly successful. And so what we're trying to do with HIP 2.0 is build on that success. To do that, we're moving from, like I said, grant-funded dollars to city and county dollars. We want to make sure that we're learning as we go, and we're creating a HIP program that builds on everything we've learned and takes it to the next level. So we're going to grow the program. We're going to expand. HIP 1.0 was mostly focused in Basin 1. HIP 2.0 will be focused mostly in Basin 2. Basin 2 is largely in the county jurisdiction, and so we're working really closely with county staff to make sure that we have a uniform program across the jurisdictions. And we're listening to feedback, and I'll talk more about this in a few slides, but we're modifying the program to remove barriers and to find out where the barriers were and learn where we needed to simplify. We did a lot of surveys that I'll talk about, and we're taking that feedback to heart. And this is almost obvious, but we're trying to maximize public benefit. So Lake Whatcom is our drinking water source, and so increasing phosphorus reduction, we want to get the most bang for our buck where we can with HIP 2.0. And we want to think long-term. We want to develop a strategy that can be in place for years to come, and we want to develop a strategy that creates assurances that the investments we're making under HIP 2.0 we can count as part of our TMDL reduction, our phosphorus reduction as part of the TMDL for years to come. And of course, we want to be efficient. We want to work within our existing resources, with our existing staff and our existing budgets, with the contractor capacity that's out there to make sure this is a program that is efficient and sustainable. And the program has to be compliant with our existing development regulations. And this is something that we find oftentimes there's some confusion in the community. People want to expand their footprint, their house footprint, or put on a new deck. And that's not what the HIP program is about. The HIP program is about working within our existing development regulations to reduce the phosphorus off private property. And they need to follow design standards. So projects must use the best of the best management practices. So there's a lot of BMPs out there, but through the feedback that we got and what we learned during HIP 1.0, we're just going with the things we know work that give us the most bang for our buck. So how can we improve HIP to increase participation? As I mentioned, we did some in-depth research. So staff worked really closely together and with county staff and with several contracted research firms. We did resident surveys, we did focus groups. We learned a lot from staff experience, so we set up situations where we could pull that experience that our staff has into the conversation. We created advisory teams, and we did business interviews to hear what the contractors had to say about the program through HIP 1.0. And we asked, how can we improve HIP to achieve greater phosphorus reduction? How can we maximize our return on investment? So we're focusing on property types with the largest impact. Again, kind of obvious, but we learned that those properties are specifically shoreline properties, creekside properties, and properties with large lawn. And we want to increase the average phosphorus reduction per project. In HIP 1.0, we did a lot of great projects and a lot of community building and community education, but some of the projects, we didn't get the maximum phosphorus reduction that we would have liked to have seen. How can we improve HIP to ensure long-term benefits? So we're working on developing reasonable and acceptable access and maintenance agreements so that when we make these investments, that we have the tools necessary to go back in and ensure they're working so that we can make sure that we are able to count those continued phosphorus reductions year after year in the TMDL. And then providing support for long-term maintenance. We're trying to give the homeowners options about what the maintenance looks like, who does it, how does that play out over the years. And then if the homeowner decides they want to do it themselves, providing them the support they need to do that successfully. So through all that research, we got about 270 unique recommendations for how to change HIP 2.0. And we took those and we put them through a filter or criteria and made sure that they were all acceptable to homeowners, generally, that they're feasible, that the government can actually implement these, and that they're effective. They get us where we want to go in terms of phosphorus reduction in Lake Whatcom. And of those 270, there's 6 that we're going to actually move forward. So these are the changes we're going to make. The first 4 are processes, like process-oriented changes that will be within the administration of the program. So expanding to new areas, again, we're going to be moving into Basin 2. One of the types of feedback that we got consistently was that people don't trust the government. And so sending government staff out there to work on private property wasn't a big seller for people. And so we got feedback that their Washington State University Cooperative Extension is a very trusted source of information, as is the Whatcom Conservation District. And so we're reaching out to both of those entities to figure out if one of them can serve as the agent. And we've had very positive conversations about that today, and I'm very optimistic. We're also going to simplify the projects, and specifically the BMPs. So instead of having a long laundry list of things that might be attractive but not necessarily effective, we're really whittling that down to about 5 to 7 BMPs. And then we're developing training programs so that the contractors and the designers that actually go out and do the work for the homeowners have been through a certification process so that we know they know what they're talking about and that they can accurately represent that to the property owners. The last 2 I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail. So focusing incentive on the highest impact. What we found through the research is that less than 25% of properties produce 50% of the impact, greater than 50% of the impact for phosphorus. And those types of properties include shoreline, creekside, and the lots with the largest lawn. The shoreline properties, because they are immediately on the shoreline, you can't get downstream of them, if you will, to put in a capital project. And so they, by nature, have the most impact because you can't treat them otherwise. So we want to pay a lot of attention and focus a lot of resources on solutions to that. Creekside, same type of issue. And then the lots with the largest lawn, those are one of the biggest phosphorus contributions. So the new program is built to appeal to property owners in this group. And then we talk about revised incentive structure. So the investment level should be tied to public benefit. So the greater the benefit, the greater the investment level. We talk about caps on investments. So if somebody came in with a 2-acre parcel of lawn, would we allow them to put the entire 2 acres into the HIP program? Or would we cap it to make sure that there's room for everybody to be in the program all at once? And our recommendation, you'll see on the next slide, is to not have a cap. If somebody's willing to put that type of property into the program, then we want to take advantage of it. We looked at requirements for mandatory cost sharing and whether or not we wanted to discourage large projects or accept them. And we came up with a simple incentive that's easier to understand and explain. We got a lot of feedback that HIP 1.0 was a little complicated, and so we're trying to make it easy to understand. So the new structure, we're talking about that the incentive or the investment would be $1.30 per square foot of improved area, and there would be no cap on the dollar value of that investment. The out-of-pocket cost to participant, we're aiming for lower than HIP 1.0 for an average projects on average properties. And HIP 1.0, let me look at my notes here. Like here, what was the number for HIP 1.0? 37%, and we're aiming for 15%. Okay, so the HIP 1.0 was average 37% cost to the property owners, and for HIP 1.0, the out-of-pocket cost would be limited to 15% or thereabouts. We haven't settled on an exact number yet. The area threshold. So when property owners have a large lot and they're coming in and they want to get involved in the HIP program, we need to have some sort of minimum threshold so that we make sure, again, that we're getting the most we can out of each opportunity that's presented to itself, to the city. So we're recommending a minimum 25% area threshold for the program. And that we're recommending access and maintenance agreements so that when we've made these investments, we can go back year after year to make sure they are still functioning and still doing their job, removing the phosphorus. And with that, I will ask if there's any questions.
Great. Committee members, questions, comments? Council members, questions, comments? Councilmember Lillquist.
I actually have a series of related questions, and it's not so much about the changes to the HIP program. I think the changes from version 1.0 to 2.0 are very good. It really has to do with the source of the funding and the fairness and equitability of how these are paid for. My understanding is the city is paying for it out of utility money. Ratepayers pay that across the entire city. And I'm wondering, how's the county paying for it? And how are they apportioning costs? And the reason why I say this is in one of the memos, it says that the project is limited according to the budget. And you said something very similar. You said we work within existing resources. And I've seen this before on Lake Whatcom. We seem to scale the program to match our budget rather than scaling the program to match the need or to match the size of the problem. It's kind of understandable. But it would be nice if we actually had funding which matched the scale of the problem. It's sort of like Lake Whatcom. We're cleaning up Lake Whatcom in 50 years, not because it's the best number, because it's the longest possible number allowed by law. So can we accelerate funding? And more importantly, can that funding be more fair and equitable? Is it fair that all ratepayers are contributing to these programs? The entire community benefits, but the entire community doesn't contribute to the problem equally. So I sent out around a question earlier today to you, Ted, and to Peter. Basically said, are there other mechanisms of raising money besides the ratepayers? Can we charge ratepayers different amounts? I think the answer is no under the law. Are there other mechanisms? And for example, the county could impose a sub-flood zone. And if they drew that around the Lake Whatcom watershed, they could levy a particular rate in the watershed that wouldn't be paid by people up in Blaine, but would be paid by people, including Bellingham residents, I assume. I don't know. So my understanding is you don't quite have a full answer, but I'm wondering if you give me a partial answer now, then maybe we can have a longer discussion later.
Yeah, thank you. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. Those are very good questions, and you're right, we don't have all of the answers at this time. We do fund the city's portion through the water utility. So it's the water utility that pays it, not the stormwater utility. The distinction there is stormwater utility funds can only be spent within the city limits because those are the folks that pay the stormwater utility. There's more restrictions on where it can be spent. The water utility, although again it's primarily city residents that pay that, although we do have some outside the city customers. The water source is certainly outside of the city limits, and all utility ratepayers, water payers benefit from any work that protects Lake Whatcom as the water source. So we pay with water utility money. You did mention that it can be challenging to charge similar customers different rates. So typically, when you look at rate setting, you want to be uniform across your customer classes, and the customer classes are generally residential, commercial, industrial, things like that. So when you look at residential customers throughout the city, to charge residential water customers in the watershed one rate and residential water customers outside the watershed a different rate could be problematic. We need to look at that a little bit more, and we intend to do that. Likely the scenario to have the ability to charge folks inside the watershed more, maybe to do something similar like to what you suggested the county might do, create a new district or try to create a new customer class of some kind. Maybe a little bit easier to do in the stormwater utility than the water utility, in that you can probably have a discussion about cost to serve, the folks that live in the watershed being perhaps higher than the folks that live outside the watershed. But it does get challenging, because then it begs the question, what about other impacts in other parts of the city where the people that live there may have a higher cost to serve than folks in another part? You know, do the people that live on the near shore that drain to the bay have a bigger responsibility in water quality as it relates to Bellingham Bay than folks elsewhere? So we have to look at all of that. I'll work with Peter and the legal department to do that, and perhaps come back for a larger discussion with council, because those are good questions. They're questions that have been raised in the past, but we don't have an in-depth analysis at this point in terms of what we can do. The question about how the county's paying for it, Renee, you may know. I think there's flood zone money in there, but I'm not entirely sure of the entire makeup of their funding.
Right. So for 2017 and 18, they put $100,000 a year in their budget, from what I understand, and that's flood zone money.
So I guess here's where I'm going with this. I think the program would be most effective if there's both carrot and stick. The carrot, obviously, are these funds where the city will be offering to pay majority of the costs for these retrofits. But the stick would be basically be, if you're contributing to the problem, you have to pay a little into it. And if you then, you know, did retrofit your property, then the stick can go away, right? The stick is only used as necessary. I just think there's a larger issue of how we pay for these things equitably and fairly, and I don't think we fully answered it yet. But I really like the improvements to the program.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Councilmember Barker.
Is there, I guess, a trigger, some ability to be nimble in your program, since you have changed it a little dramatically in some ways, and I do like the changes, where you might set a time where you're hoping to hit a certain number? Do you guys have something like that? So if it's not working out, you're going to be able to transform that pretty quickly?
Yeah, we do. Okay. And it isn't formalized in a target sort of way, but it's just the continued adaptive management of, this isn't working, we haven't spent our full budget, we don't have any interested people, and then going back to our research, looking at what it told us, maybe we need to do different research, maybe we need to ask questions in different ways. So that's inherent in the program.
Other questions, comments? Councilmember Vargas.
Renee, I just wanted to say I think that these are excellent updates. I know lots of people in Bellingham have used the HIP program and are very appreciative, but also struggled with a lot of things. And I really want to thank your team for all the work they did on taking a deep dive and figuring out what wasn't working and doing these improvements, because I think this is going to be a much more effective program. So thank you, and thank your team for all the work they did on this.
Thank you.
I wanted to echo, pardon me, Councilmember Barker.
I'm still catching up 8 months in here. Do we require at point of sale on anything that's in the watershed there, that goes something on the deed, there's an expectation, so that we're eventually getting to a place that it's the property owners? I get now we're trying to build a culture of taking care of the watershed, and we're going about it very strategically, but eventually, in my opinion, there certainly should be some, people should know what they're buying into, and they should certainly have some responsibility when they're buying into that watershed, especially because we've limited the development all around there, and they will be receiving some benefits and home improvement values, so home values without improvement, I guess. And we don't do anything
do
like
that.
that now.
Have we had discussions on council about doing that?
Councilmember Lillquist.
This has come up in the past. Under the Realtors Code of Ethics, they are required to tell people buying any property anywhere if there are significant regulations or encumbrances on that. And my discussions with the realtors say that, yeah, under that guideline, our realtors should be telling people that there are Lake Whatcom watershed development rules and there are different requirements if you buy in this property. Even so, anecdotally, there are people who are surprised, who buy a property and only after they buy the property, because they're new to the community, they didn't realize that they couldn't do this to their lawn, or that they couldn't put in a lawn, or that they'll be, if they retrofit their property, they, have certain requirements on them. So it's right now handled informally through that mechanism.
One of the things that we continue to work on is for the properties that do participate in the HIP program, the city and the county wanting to have access to the property to make sure that the facilities remain in place, that they're functioning, that they're being well maintained. We're pursuing that to see what type of agreements we might be able to come up with between the city and the property owner, the county and the property owner, so that it's clear to everybody that these improvements have been made, that there's a reason why they've been made, and that there's an expectation that they stay in place and that they're maintained, so that the city and the county can continue to get the benefit of the improvements in terms of phosphorus reduction. On one of Renee's slides, we show that that's something that's still in process, so we're trying to work through that with the property owners, the county, and the city, and we'll be coming back to council at some point with some ideas on that.
Okay. I just want to mention that I echo the same concerns of Councilmember Lillquist in relation to how we pay for these things or how they're paid for. This is a relatively inexpensive program compared to capital stormwater improvements. If I have my numbers right, I think the capital improvements per pound of phosphorus are north of $100,000, and this type of program is around $45,000, so it's much less in terms of cost. I do want to thank Renee LaCroix and her staff, Eli, for being nimble and being responsive to homeowners, and I think doing the survey was definitely a step in the right direction in terms of understanding what those concerns were for homeowners, so we can get them to participate more, and it's good to see the county on board more with this. Any other questions? Councilmember Barker.
So to pursue a conversation further, because I would rather not have to go through more siloed funding to figure out who's going to pay for what, but I certainly do feel like people who are buying in from here until whenever, this is a new responsibility of theirs. And I would like to discuss further what those options are to say at point of sale. We do it with other things. If there's a homeowner occupancy or something on a land, we do put something with the property. And I'd be interested if council would like to have that conversation. So as we're doing this, we're also moving forward, letting people know that we're not going to be able to continue to pay for this forever. Eventually, we're going to have an expectation that it is your responsibility. Do I have to make a motion to get there? Are you guys interested in?
I'm wondering if that might be a topic for the Lake Whatcom management meeting, the one that meets every month. We are looking for new topics. I think that's probably a great one to bring up.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll see if Mark can add that to our agenda for that meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, third item on for this committee is in relation to a proposed wetland and habitat mitigation program update. City of Bellingham is developing a wetland and habitat mitigation program to benefit our community. The goals of the program are to improve the success rate of mitigation projects, reduce costs associated with mitigation, coordinate mitigation efforts, and streamline the mitigation process. The program will encompass all drainage basins in the City of Bellingham and urban growth areas. Public Works staff will provide a status update, estimated schedule, and next steps.
Hello again, Annalise Burns, Habitat and Restoration Manager, City of Bellingham Public Works. So this will be a brief update for the mitigation program. We'll start out with a little bit of background and then move into benefits of mitigation programs, the types of potential programs that are our options, the current status that we are at with the city's attempt to begin a mitigation program, and then what steps we see as next steps. So a little bit of background. Obviously, critical areas are part of WISE land use. They help us with flood control, groundwater recharge, water quality improvements. And really, when you're talking about a mitigation program, you are talking about the critical areas of wetlands, streams, lakes, shorelines, and fish and wildlife habitat. And fish and wildlife habitat obviously has commercial importance for our commercial fisheries as well as our recreational fishers. And it has other recreational benefits as well. Wetlands and streams are an integral part of our recreation system, our parks, and they provide really amazing outdoor education opportunities, especially for science education and for at-risk youth. But that's not the only part of our community. What makes a whole community also is a vibrant economy and affordable housing. And we recognize that sometimes there are unavoidable impacts to our critical areas that result from housing and schools and transportation and all the other infrastructure that we need for our city. And so the question comes, how best do we deal with mitigating those impacts or compensating for those impacts? So traditionally, developers are going it alone. Basically, they would be required to mitigate for their own impacts and find a way to do that themselves, find a property, to design a mitigation project. And that has led to inadvertently kind of a haphazard way of doing mitigation. You don't have mitigation cited or strategically planned in a way that really addresses the city's water quality, is not necessarily sited in a location that has habitat connectivity or recovers salmon. So another way to approach it would be to step back and say, how can we use mitigation to help fulfill the city's goals and vision for our own community? And we are lucky in the city of Bellingham, fortunate that the City Council adopted our legacies and strategic commitments in 2009, and that can serve as our guide for when we're looking at mitigation, how can we use mitigation to help fulfill these goals? And so taking that approach in 2012, the city proactively started to look at mitigation in a new way and said, there is a better way to do it. What are other jurisdictions doing? And looked at exploring the idea of a mitigation program. So very briefly, a mitigation program, some of you have seen this slide before, so I will be brief. Is there a way to dim the lights at all? Might be, thank you. So on the left-hand side, you see that we have watershed processes, land use practices, and community goals. And if we're able to take those together and meld them together, you can weave those into a mitigation plan. So strategically looking long-term, how do you address all three of those in a mitigation plan? And then you fund that plan with permit recipients contributing funds into the plan that would end up building your mitigation projects. And it's all a strategic, proactive approach. So the benefits of doing a program like that are many, and they benefit developers, regulators, and citizens. They increase mitigation success rate, or more efficient use of funds. You reduce staff time spent on violations. You can prioritize your mitigation actions to make sure the money you do spend is in the most appropriate place. You can provide funding for needed improvements. A lot of time we know where improvement is needed. We don't have a way to fund it. It's sort of matching those up together. You can streamline your permitting. The developers like the predictability. It's predictable because the mitigation program has multi-agency buy-in up front. And it really sets Bellingham apart. Even though mitigation programs are encouraged by the agencies and developers and the private community really like them, not a lot of jurisdictions have them. So the types of potential mitigation programs, there's three, and I'm not going to go into detail in this presentation. I'm happy to answer questions at question and answer if you would like. But if you hear the terms mitigation bank, in lieu fee program, or advanced mitigation, those are all types of mitigation programs. The graphic that's a little bit hard to see, but it's Washington State, you can see the white labels, shows all of the mitigation banks in the state of Washington as of May of 2016. You can see there's only 21 of them. So if you think of all the development projects and all the developers we have, 21 programs is not very many. And the only mitigation bank in our region is the Lummi Wetland and Habitat Mitigation Bank. And in 2012, the city did a review of which program might be most effective for the city, and it was recommended that an in-lieu fee program might be the best type. We're right in the process of reevaluating that decision, kind of updating it based on current economics and comprehensive plan outlook. So our current status, it's a little bit easier to start at what is the process. If we were to open a mitigation program, you would start with inventorying your resources. What do you have and where are they? You would assemble a team of people that would help you in implementing and designing the mitigation program. You would then begin developing the mitigation framework, so administrative framework, basically. You would then submit that to the multi-agency review. So this would have local, state, federal, and tribal review. And then you would open the program. And the last time I came to council to discuss this, we were here. We had not started our inventories yet. So we have made tremendous progress in the last 4 years. We are now here. We have finished our inventories, we've assembled our teams, and we are now in the middle of developing the program framework. So the inventories were conducted between 2012 and 2015. They were citywide, they were science-based, and they formed the foundation of the mitigation program. Our current status, we've hired 2 consultants. This is fairly recent, Northwest Ecological Services and Water and Land Natural Resource Consulting, to help us really ask the very strategic questions about how we want the program designed, and then to actually write the application itself and the program framework. We've created a steering committee of people to help guide this process, both city staff from multiple departments, as well as outside staff from people that we might, or agencies that we might consider partners, including Whatcom County. And we are in the midst of hiring a staff person, which their primary responsibility would be implementing the program. To continue on the things that I do daily, and the staff in our department, are the fine details right now. The most strategic questions are really, what is the demand going to be for mitigation? And we're talking about a 20-year time frame. So we're looking at forecasts for housing and for transportation infrastructure, for schools. And we will be meeting with user groups, special interest groups, and stakeholders to inform that process very soon. The next steps coming up, our plan is to have a prospectus or an application submitted to the agencies by the end of 2016. It's a very aggressive timeline, but we think we can do it. It is an anticipated 5-year review and revision time period. That's been the typical timeline, and that really has to do with staffing at the state and federal level. It's an iterative process. Our goal is to have those credits available at the end of that 5-year time period. So that would be 2022. We know that's a long time to wait, especially when we get calls that people really would like this program up and running now. So we're also going to be looking at interim tools. So what can we do to kind of bridge that gap, including potentially advanced mitigation? That's all I have for the update, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Committee members, Councilmember Barker.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that there's will be unique, that not very many jurisdictions have decided to do this. I'm assuming one of them is having to get a whole other staff person, the expense. Are there any other, like, that you could take maybe out of the top 3 why other jurisdictions wouldn't want to do this?
I think a lot of jurisdictions do want to do it, okay. But you're right. It has a lot to do with the capital outlay. So mitigation banks are often considered the most beneficial for the sponsor, but they require the most economic investment up front. So that is a big barrier. It takes a lot of administrative oversight. This is a commitment that a jurisdiction would be making for the long term. And so do you have the staffing and the expertise to be able to carry it forward? A lot of people don't have their inventories done.
Oh, yeah.
So they can't move forward with the program because they can't describe what the need is and where the benefit might be. And in lieu fee programs in particular are a new type of program that hasn't had the legal framework and the agency buy-off until recently. And so there aren't as many in lieu fee programs just because they haven't been available as a tool until the last 5 years.
Okay. Councilmember Lillquist.
Thanks, Dan. So what I like most about this is the possibility of increasing the success rate of mitigation projects, as you say, not fragmented, but coordinated, comprehensive, professionally managed. But I kind of want to back up on the whole issue of mitigation. Mitigation is part of the mitigation sequence. If there's a negative impact, by law, the first thing you're supposed to do is avoid the impact altogether. If you can't do that, by law, the next thing you're required to do is reduce that impact in any way possible. And if you can't avoid it and you can't reduce it, then you mitigate it. So I think the risk here in how this is implemented is that this could be the easy way out. It's supposed to be the easy way out, right? It's supposed to be that if you have to mitigate, here's the easiest way to do it. So it's supposed to be easy. But it shouldn't be so easy that we skip steps 1 and 2, avoid and reduce. What kind of protections are in place, or that we can assure that, instead of jumping straight to step C, that we go through A and B first?
Well, it is in our codes as well as GMA that mitigation sequencing is exactly what you said, where first you avoid, and you really only get to what we call compensatory mitigation or the on-the-ground work unless you absolutely have to. And you're right that there are a lot in the private sector or even the public sector, really, when you're doing a development project, part of the deterrent right now is the burden of having to go through mitigation and find your own mitigation site, and that it's expensive. And so by taking away the burden part, having people just write a check, that is one less obstacle. And we are going to have to make sure that we are enforcing and administering our code in the way that it's written, and I think our staff is very good at that right now. The other agencies are also they're familiar with this because the Lummi Mitigation Bank is open, and so they know that there needs to be more watchfulness over the avoidance and minimization. We don't have any formal additional procedures, but we can look at that, work with our planning department if there's something that we need to do to help bolster that side.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Barker.
I was interested in, I'm assuming you guys started the process in 2012. Since, have you all reached out to the Lummi Nation to see if there would be any unintended consequences or if they had any concerns about us developing this program?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. So they know that we are pursuing this. I've had very informal conversations with some of their staff. We know that we want to reach out to them in a more formal way and bring them along so there's no surprises. It is an open marketplace, so they're in a little bit of a different situation in that they will actually be sitting on our review team as an agency, but they are also a competitor in the private marketplace. And so the Corps of Engineers is also involved with this, and they're aware that in our jurisdiction this is a little bit of a sensitivity that we'll be careful with, and we want to make sure our relationship with the Lummi Nation is not hindered by us pursuing a mitigation program. So we'll bring them along with the process.
Okay. Other questions or comments from council members? All right. I did want to correct myself. I meant Lake Whatcom Policy Group, not Lake Whatcom Management Group when I mentioned that before. End of committee.